remember when I first started out, I found it very difficult because as a developer, you're thinking like this. It's like almost like black box. Someone gives you requirements, you know what your system is, and you develop within that. But as an architect, it's more like a T shape. You need to have the width of understanding and know what all the dependencies are. And these aren't just technical dependencies or operational dependencies, enterprise dependencies, business dependencies, but also have the technical depth as well.
Welcome to Stacks Sessions. I'm Jeff Keyes, Field CTO at AllStacks, where we explore the intersection of software engineering and business strategy and how AI is changing the way product and engineering leaders build, decide, and head. I'm really excited about today. We're joined by Stuart D, Associate Director of Enterprise Architecture and Banking and Financial Markets at NTT Data UK. He's out of London. He spent 20 years or more. I guess I won't draw any lines there, Stuart, because, we're all seeing the thinning hair, and that's okay.
I thought you were going to say box. I thought you were going to say boxes and lines.
I love it. But you know what, Stuart? You've had decades dealing with regulated IT landscapes, banking, highly regulated environments. You've just published a book, Practical IT Architecture, and really, it's about the job of the architect and once you strip away the technology. But Stuart, thanks for being here.
No, thank you very much, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I kind of gave just the high level. Tell us really all about Stuart and some of the things that made you want to write Practical IT Architecture. And I understand you have a new newsletter as well.
Yeah, no, that's correct, and we can cover that. What did made me write Practical Architecture? Well, I think what sort of was the foundation of it is actually, it was one of my bosses at NTT said I should start writing a blog to get obviously more coverage and more exposure. And I wrote some articles, and then after I'd done the first article and I saw how it went, I sort of got the bug for it and then started writing more and more articles. And I write a few articles for Architecture Governance magazine. I write one for QC blog, and now I'm doing a very, very mini newsletter, as you've said, called Architecture Without the Bull, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So after doing enough articles, it sort of gave me the framework for the book. And I had a lot of stories, battle scars, whatever you want to call it, through my architecture career. So putting the two together, I decided to write the book, and that's how it really came about.
I love it. One of the things we talked about before is you'd mentioned that you wished at the start of your career you would have written the book. Who did you write this book for?
Well, yes, I actually wrote it. Well, as you said, Jeff, the book isn't about technology. So it's really aimed at people who either are already architects and they want a refresher, because you can never learn too much. And you thought, oh, that's a good idea. Sometimes you can pick one snippet out of a book and it's worth its weight in gold. So that's one of the stuff. And the other ones are for like new architects or people that want to consider a career in architecture and want to learn the ropes. So this book is basically all the ropes of architecture summarized. But it's not about technology. It's more about the skills that support the architecture and the architect himself. So things like risk management, technical debt management, how to do effective presentations and the likes of all that.
I love it. Well, and in so many of the product teams nowadays, you don't hear the word architect come up as a core part of the squad. And technical debt you do. And how to give presentations you do.
Yeah, no,
and,
absolutely.
Stripping away the technology to make business decisions you do. So seems very appropriate for current. One of the things you have talked about is the 70-30 canvas. I'm just going to leave it there and say, take us through that. I know it's one of the core themes of the book.
Sure, no, absolutely. So let's start with the 30% side, because it's so first of all, to be an architect, depending what architect you are, but a lot of the architects come through the technical side of it. You need to be 100% technically competent. And the
Hmm.
30% of it, depending on what your role, as you start off with like a developer all the way to the architecture, will grow or shrink accordingly. Because it's more aimed at architects, then you generally end up with doing about 30% of the technology. The 70% of it
Hmm.
is the other side of the coin, and it's everything else that I've mentioned. So the stakeholder engagement, the roadmaps, how do you do effective documentation, presenting regularly, uh, debt management, risk management, and all that sort of stuff. So that's the 70 side of the coin.
I love it. I don't. Aren't you seeing that? I'll put it this way: feels like more product managers ought to have more knowledge steeped in architecture.
Well, I think if they appreciate, well, a lot of product managers have come from the architect's route, so they get it. But those that don't, need to really get an appreciation of what architecture is. And I think, again, probably the book would be a great way of filling that knowledge gap. But either way, either find out, book, work with the architects. A lot of product owners work with architects as well. So I think it's a combination of all those things, really.
Yeah. Well, and probably more along those lines, there's in this 70-30 split, as AI does more of the technical work, humans need to pick up a lot of the rest. So what's your general advice here to folks as they get into the book and the rest of it? Take us through some of the key points of that.
No, absolutely. So obviously, the book talks you through the skills that the AI won't replace from day one. So, an
Hmm.
AI is not going to be able to see someone's frustrated at a board meeting or read the room or know what's going on in someone's mind or having water cooler conversations and all that sort of stuff. But it's very good at distilling down, summarizing risk. So, where I think a lot of people in the past have been generating, technical diagrams, high level designs, roadmaps, that's all going to be done by AI without a doubt. But when I say done by AI should be assisting the architect. So because it's
Yeah.
eroded the 30%, people who are architects really need to move more to the left and do more of the 70%, if not, or
Hmm.
if they're not doing it already.
So true. Reading a room is kind of the whole key. Building, you hinted at this, right? Building relationships are a
Absolutely.
big part of this.
No, without a
I,
doubt.
how do you know when someone's not doing that well enough?
Yes, it's interesting. Well, funny enough, I've been to a lot of presentations, and you can find out pretty interested who, well, there's different who's not listening because they're looking at their mobile phone, they're scribbling on paper, they're not engaged, and it's all about engaging people. Now, ideally, before you get to a meeting, should have done your homework before the meeting, and you should know who your
Hmm.
stakeholders are and how to deal with them, and who are the what you call the bad actors, or in my feed, my newsletter, the bull. Who's the bull in the room? How's he going to throw a spanner in the works, and how are you going to
Hmm.
get around that? So preparation, I think, is key for that.
And talk a bit more about that preparation. Like what kinds of things should they be doing to prepare?
Well, I mean, ideally, they should be, having stakeholder conversations, finding out what stakeholders' requirements are, what the business objectives are, how stakeholders feel about it, what their pain points are, and then when they've got something before the meeting, present what they're going to do to the stakeholder, so they can actually review it. So when they come to the meeting, it's no surprise, but sometimes you don't have that luxury of that, and you have to think on your feet.
Hmm. Yeah. I find that too, when you're walking into these meetings, if you just had thought about it for a minute, even, you could come up with what would be the most obvious objection or the most likely set of questions that are going to get brought up that you can at least you see if you got them right.
Well,
Part of that preparation is so key.
well, yeah, no, absolutely. I went through a presentation once many years ago, and this is what sort of led me to think more about the practical side and the soft side skills of architecture. And the guy actually before the meeting came round to everybody and says, "What are you expecting out of this meeting?" And then he went up there and he presented to everyone's expectations. It was an absolute raving success. So again,
Wow.
again, again, it's preparation, but preparation in a very
Yeah.
short time scale.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not like you can't use other tools and conversations in the
Of
past
course.
to help guide this,
Hmm.
because
Absolutely.
that's an easy question. Just prompt it. Hey, this is what I'm going to present. What kinds of things should I expect?
Well, absolutely.
But taking that extra couple minutes is important. Hey, let me pivot a bit. One of the things we talked about was, you've lived the path from an engineer to an architect, and the things you're talking about are applicable to developers, development managers, product leaders. I feel like everyone needs a bit more architecture in their mindset. You said the hardest part of this shift wasn't technical, and it's a mindset shift. So, what actually changes as people take on more the mindset of an architecture, and where do most people get stuck?
Yeah, no, I remember when I first started out, I found it very, very difficult because as a developer, you're thinking like this. It's like almost like black box. Someone gives you requirements, you know what your system is, and you
Yeah,
develop within that. But as an architect, it's more like a T shape. You need to have the width of understanding and know what all the dependencies are. And these aren't just technical dependencies or operational dependencies, enterprise dependencies, business dependencies, but also have the technical depth as well to be able to
sure.
have conversations at all level from like CTOs all the way down to developers.
Awesome. And how do you measure your progress on that? Like, how do you know if you're doing that well?
It's a great one. Well, I mean, I always take interesting enough because I guess your product is all about measurement, and it's very
Hmm.
very interesting because architecture follows the same path. We have things called non-functional requirements, which you measure systems against to see if they've met the requirements non-functionally. But again, you can look at that in other terms as well. So one of the success that I've used is does it pass architecture review board? That is a measure of
Hmm.
success you could use. So ideally, has it been successful? Has it been approved in governance? You could use that as one of the measures, and it's a really good measure to use.
Oh, I love this conversation, by the way. I think of every product leader who's like, I've got to make sure this is going to make it through as simple as possible. I know I want some kind of agentic development, but it's got to go through an architecture review. How guidance that you have for both engineering leaders and product leaders as they're working on this to make sure they have the right level of governance and NFRs as part of their feature set as they're working on things?
No, no, absolutely. I think, I mean, generally, I guess the best way to do it, and it's very, very product based, is start with a minimum viable product, and then basically
Yeah.
build that to the business and test and uh, release on that. And if you do it, and the minimum viable product really means a minimum viable architecture to go with it as well. So from an
Hmm.
architecture perspective, you really need to think, well, okay, well, what's the end game here? What would the target state look like if I was going to do it, or a potential target state, what we call a candidate target state, and then shrink it
Hmm.
all back to the MVP or the MVA, minimum viable architecture.
When you're evaluating a minimum viable architecture, what kinds of things are you looking for to decide, is this architecture workable or not? You're sitting in an architecture review board. How do you look at things? So what kind of lens goes on as you're thinking about these things for folks that haven't been through that?
I have this penchant about risk management, and the reason is it because in my career, it in certain environments you had to be very, very cognizant and knowing about risk and use it as a form of
Hmm.
protection. So you can look at risk management from different angles. So, the first thing is what's a business risk? What's a technical risk? What's the integration risks? What's the financial risk? And I would generally approach that from that angle. But on top of that, thinking about how does this meet align with strategy? Is there a strategy?
Hmm.
What is a strategy? If you've got a strategy like cloud first and they're going, well, basically this isn't in the cloud, this is local, you go, okay, why? But
Right.
ideally, they should have come to the review board with that already, so I would have known about it, and therefore would have been able to have given the review answer there. What they would have probably accepted because we've had that conversation before. But as always, not always the case, and then people come with all sorts of stuff. So, but there's certainly strategic lenses, risk lenses, financial lenses, I mean, operational lenses. There's lots of lenses you can look at it through.
I love it. You know, one of the things that was another great line that you had was that you see governance as guardrails, not gates. And as you get into this minimum viable architecture, begs the question of like, how does a product or an engineering leader tell when the architectural rigor is protecting delivery versus slowing it down?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. So I call it governance friction. I'm just wondering if you can measure it in your product at all. It might be an idea. How
Hmm.
much, because you deal with development all the way up to, basically the stat. Can you measure
Hmm.
governance friction? That whole end-to-end process is what I call friction. And I guess it really depends on the organization, how it's set up, and how the architecture is set up, and how its governance structure is set up. Really, at the end of the day, certain certain governance structures are more nimble, and certain governance structures are not so nimble.
Yeah. And for the ones that aren't so nimble, then you sort of know the hoops that you've got to go through to get ready for that.
Absolutely.
What do you see is happening with AI and that friction? Like what's changing because of it?
Well, as I said in the book, and we've already touched on this as well. It's accelerating. Um, you know, artifact generation, thought processes, risk. I mean, it'll document risks for you. It'll document whatever you want, really. But again, there's there's a human in the loop aspect of the governance for that. So the 30% is going to be driven a lot quicker, and the 70% is the bit. I mean, it can help with the 70% as well. I mean, people use it to generate and a few consultants have been caught out of it as well. It's all over the news, roadmaps, white papers, and all sorts of
Yeah.
stuff. So,
Yeah.
it's eroding into that as well. So it's not just the 30%, it's probably 30% moving more to the left, maybe 45, 50%, and it might be a different case when AI is actually robots and they can actually see and understand emotions. But until that day, and it's quite still far away, um, then it's still the human in the loop, and they still got the the ability to do things that AA hasn't got the ability to do.
Yeah. Are there, I'm sure you have experiences where momentum was really slowed down, where governance was a gate versus friction. And what brought you to that? What can you just describe some of those stories of what happened?
Well, that's a really good one. I remember many years ago I was doing a cloud service, and I warmed up the stakeholder to say, uh, to the solution. And then we went to the solution. We went to the governance board, and he says, "No, I don't like that," even though I warmed him up. So he told us why he thought it was wrong. We went back, and after me, these governance things, and the time you get it through the loop can take months, you know. Uh,
Hmm.
dep- so I went back, represented it, and he was, "No, I don't like it. In fact, I've had another thought now about this." So even if you think your stakeholders are aligned, beware. They're only human, so they can make changes, last minute decisions, and that. But again, it's all about trying to get as much done up front and trying to minimize the risk.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of getting just enough done, you talked about this minimum viable architecture. How do you know when you've arrived beyond just did it make it through the review board? For someone doing this sort of the first time, should they go talk to the review board, say, "Would show me some examples"? What's your guidance on how to build that out so they hit that minimum
Well,
viable?
I remember when I did my first solution architecture job, and I never presented at a review board before. So what I did is I went round to all the members on the review board and showed them what I was doing, got their feedback, and made sure it was all was all covered. So when I went to the review board, obviously I got more questions and everything like that, but it satisfied them because I'd already known what their, as I say, pain points were.
Mm, I love it. That must have been insightful.
Yeah, it was
So,
scary.
well, that's sort of what it always has felt like to me, right? You're going to
Yeah,
go to a change advisory board. You're going to go to an architecture board. It's always going to be this feeling of not knowing if you've brought enough stuff to the table or not.
absolutely.
Let's switch topics here to one of your pet subjects, which is legacy modernization. Every engineering and product leader is asking the same thing. How do I go faster? But I've got 30-year-old brownfield behind me
No,
and a
absolutely.
boat anchor that I'm carrying with me. Doesn't code generation just fix all this because I can go regen that? What's real today? What's hype?
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of companies, including NTT, have what's called modernization frameworks, which it runs off well, things like Cogen and stuff like that. And there's a lot of tools by vendors as well that basically will convert like virtual machines into containers or and that
Hmm.
sort of stuff as well. So it accelerates it without a doubt. You can get onto platforms a lot quicker, but it needs to still be tested and it still needs to be have the human at the end of the day making the value judgment decision on whether it's good. But the other thing is, when this code does get when you do convert a virtual machine to say like a container, it does warrant the question, what's the code it's produced and how effective and how good is it? And has it thought about it
Hmm.
from a whole architectural perspective in terms of principles, in terms of software architecture? And some of the tools are really clever at that, and you probably could put that into them as well. But it's all time consuming to set them up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you've had, I mean, even internal tools you've been doing, not that we would name any names of different tools, but you've had quite a number of modernization projects that you've been working on. I, can you just walk through some of the process and things you learned and why this became a passion and basically insights that we should learn from you on it?
Well, I think the important thing is um, the discovery, because in the discovery, you find out what's there. You'll find out what the interdependencies are, because unpicking the dependencies is always the painful thing. Whether it's a
Hmm.
dependencies between software modules or it's a dependencies between integration or whatever, there's going to be dependencies. Uh, and then also it's the things that you don't find out from the discovery tools as well. Like the discovery tool can't look at this system. Oh, why not? Because it never took like that. I'm going to have to do it manually. So
Oh,
but again, I think the discovery, like all things, gives you the potential to then scope out the roadmap and prioritize things. That's really important in modernization to understand, what exists already, what the roadmap look like, what the risks look like, and what the art of the possible is.
that's okay. So, a pattern I keep hearing is that AI makes code so cheap to generate that debt now accumulates faster than ever. I'll just leave that there. What's your advice?
Absolutely. I think vibe coding is a big thing where the architect works with the AI. That way, the software architect or the developer can put the governance and good software principles into the knowledge management. In fact, I would start off with, probably even before using the vibe code, actually to train the AI on this is the patterns, software patterns we use. These are the principles we use, and that can take many months to do. To make
Yeah.
the vibe coding better, because at the end of the day, it's gonna churn out junk, isn't it? If you've got junk, AI is just gonna make more junk.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, what is the process as you're going through modernization? How do, how do you typically approach that from an architecture point of view?
I guess the first thing, obviously, we talked about the discovery. We haven't talked about the other end, which is the target state. It's where do you want to go, right?
Yeah.
What's
Mm-hmm.
what's wrong with what you got, and where do you want to go, right? That's probably the two big things that you got to ask. You know, Once you've
Mm-hmm.
got the target state, then it's just filling in between the discovery and or the baseline, as they call it, and the target state. And once you know the target state and you've got the discovery, then you can phase in how you want to roadmap it across all other things based on changes, requirements, business risks, and that sort of stuff. You know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, for a team starting on a legacy modernization with AI in the loop, what's a few expectations to set on the first day so they don't declare victory too early?
Just don't press the button and hope for success.
Yeah, but that implies a lot of stuff, right? That implies don't
Absolutely.
trust. You're not going to take all the output and all of a sudden, poof, it's done. So,
Well, yeah, precisely. That's my point. It's I think there's a lot of expectations that AI will deliver, but it
mhm,
does. But it delivers what large language models are very good at interpreting exactly what you put in there, and if you don't put it in correctly, it will generate a lot, as we've already discussed. It can generate a lot of garbage, or it can fall short. This is why I said
mhm.
probably around modernization. You probably need to have like training the AI to understand what the business is all about. And it's got some sort of context around it. And that's not only business context, but architectural context as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot here in thinking about the architecture that we're going forward on versus just let it sort of generate a bunch of stuff. I mean, how many companies don't even have an architecture board that they can review from that they've got to go rethink about what is my minimum viable architecture as I go take this thing forward?
Well, you find
Um,
no, you find that a lot in startups as well. A lot of startups are small. They don't, their chief developer is or lead developer is a software architect, not an enterprise architect. And it's a difference. It's a
mhm,
bit it's a bit like I've seen this quite a lot on LinkedIn. A startup CTO isn't the same as a CTO in a larger organization who's more strategic. And it's the same
mhm.
thing with architecture as well. So it really depends on the organization.
Absolutely. We've talked about a bunch of different stuff from governance, 70/30, modernization, uh, putting human in the what advice do you want to give listeners today, and what are the common topics that you want to make sure are discussed more frequently?
Yeah, no, it's a good one actually. Common topics. Right. Okay. I don't think risk management is as strong as it could be in architecture. And the way that architects write risk is generally from a technical aspect, not a business aspect. So I think that's
Hmm.
one thing that architects could do a lot better with, because it helps um, with ownership. If you've got ownership, your job is a lot easier. You know, um,
Hmm.
and accountability and transparency. And I've called these the OAK principles, and it's in a course that I've written on Udemy as well on IT architecture for risk management for IT architects. So I
Hmm.
think risk management is really, really important as an architect. And in the book, I call it architectural insurance, but also it helps build trust as well. You know,
Hmm.
Whether people want to accept ownership is another matter. So I think that's really important. I think the other thing is a lot of people come to the table. Certainly people that are new to architects, and they still think it's about technology. It is and it isn't. The
Hmm.
70% isn't. So again, if I'm going to say anything, learn from the mistakes and read the book. Work with other architects. Somebody once said to me, to become a good architect, you need to work with good architects, and I actually believe that and have experienced it. So
Hmm.
go and join architecture chat groups, learn with other architects, because that will only make you a better architect. That coupled with risk management and communication skills is probably a recipe for success.
I love it. What talking about that? What kind of newsletters and so forth should folks listen to and follow?
There's a lot out there, and you can join lots of things, lots of architecture group. But I've written one myself called Architecture Without the Bull. Because
Hmm.
and the bull is the bad actor in any situation, and then it's
Hmm.
how do you combat the bull and provide architecture sanity. So, and I thought the best way to do it, being like the book, concise, I'm going to do it in cartoon form. So every day there's a cartoon out with a different theme and a different thing. And basically, the bull is the key character in that. So, if you're interested, it's probably worth signing up to that.
Fantastic. This is great. Um, well, Stuart, like this is great advice and insights. If you've never talked to an architect before, now's your opportunity. It's time
Absolutely.
to get out and get going with that. How do people get a hold of you and how do they find your newsletter?
Well, it's actually on LinkedIn. So if you look at my profile, there's the newsletter Architecture Without the Bull on LinkedIn, and also there's it points to my book as well if you want to buy the book.
Excellent. We'll put links to it as part of
Oh,
this
thank you, Jeff.
podcast as well. So, Stuart, this has been fantastic. I appreciate your time and love that you're able to give some insights for those that have never been through an architecture review board, and insights on doing more architectural thinking, planning for risk, understanding that 70% is about the stuff that AI can't do. What a great set of advice here. This has been great.
Thank you, Jeff.